Leonard Page had not expected the job to require this much stillness. That was the part they never mentioned in the listing. That night, security at a private medical facility was less about watching and more about learning to disappear into the architecture of a building that operated as though it needed no watching at all. He had taken the position 14 months ago, 2 weeks after his daughter, Ren, started 3rd grade, and 3 weeks after he quietly acknowledged that his savings would not carry them through another season of uncertainty. The salary was modest, the hours long and overnight, and the building, Harwick Private Medical Center, 12 floors of pale limestone and tinted glass on the edge of the city's financial district, was the kind of place where the lighting in the corridors was designed to communicate calm rather than provide it. Leonard was 48 years old. He wore his security uniform the way men who have worn other uniforms learn to wear things, without vanity, without resentment, with the flat efficiency of someone who understands that what you wear is not what you are. He had spent 10 years as a registered nurse in a Level I trauma center before he left clinical work. He had left because of Caroline, because of what he had not caught and could not unknow. Ren drew him a picture every morning before school. She left it on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker, because she knew he came home at 6:15, and that was the first thing he reached for. This particular morning, a Thursday in early November, the drawing showed a tall figure in a dark uniform with a circle badge, standing in front of what appeared to be a large window. At the bottom, in the careful block printing of a 9-year-old who had recently decided that lowercase letters were optional, she had written, "Dad is the one WCO sees." He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket and did not think about it again until much later, when thinking about it felt different than it would have at 6:15 in the morning. Adrienne Lowe had founded the Lowe Foundation for Neurological Research at 51. 8 years after her older brother was diagnosed with a degenerative motor disease, and 4 years after the facility treating him exhausted every conventional option and asked the family to consider palliative care. She had taken the money her father left her, added the proceeds from the sale of her first company, and built something her brother never lived to benefit from, but that had, in the years since, funded clinical trials that changed the outcome for 47,000 patients with similar diagnoses. She was precise in conversation and unsparing in self-assessment, which is why the 14 months of progressive neurological decline she had been experiencing at Harwick had not, until recently, frightened her. They had confused her. There was a difference, and she was careful to maintain it. Dr. Philip Stroud was 55. He had trained at institutions whose names functioned as their own credentials, and he moved through the treatment suites and consultation rooms of Harwick's neurology wing with the particular ease of a man who had never been made to doubt his own reading of a clinical picture. He had thin silver hair, good posture, and a habit of placing both hands flat on the desk when he explained a treatment rationale, a gesture that communicated authority and openness simultaneously, and which he had, over 20 years, refined into something indistinguishable from instinct. He had been treating Adrienne Lowe for 14 months. The diagnosis was a rare progressive autonomic syndrome, a legitimate and legitimately difficult condition, difficult to distinguish without exhaustive workup from several other neurological presentations. He had told her this early and often. He had told her that the treatment course would be long, that the markers of progress were subtle and required expert interpretation, that her body was doing something complex that demanded patience and investment. She had invested $12 million and endured 11 rounds of specialized intravenous protocol, and she had gotten worse. Not obviously. Not in ways that showed at the Foundation's annual gala in October, when she stood at the podium and spoke for 22 minutes without notes about the importance of funding research that no one else would fund, but in ways she felt at the ends of her fingers and in the hesitation her wrist had developed when she tried to turn a door handle in one smooth motion. In the gray line along her lower gum that she had noticed in the bathroom mirror 2 months ago and mentioned to Dr. Stroud, who attributed it to a reaction to one of the supplemental compounds and adjusted a secondary formula accordingly. It had not improved. Leonard Page noticed it on a Wednesday night at 11:43. He was making the 4th-floor treatment suite pass, part of the standard security rotation for nights when the overnight nursing staff ran light. The suites at that level were for long-term inpatient cases, patients wealthy enough or ill enough to warrant the continuous monitoring Harwick's premium wing provided. He had done the same pass 600 times without incident. He was doing it the same way this night. Steady pace, eyes moving, not lingering, not hurrying. The door to suite 412 was propped open 6 inches by a wedge the overnight nurse used when she needed to hear both rooms from the corridor. Adrienne Lowe was sitting upright in the bed near the window, talking with the nurse about something Leonard did not hear. What he heard was the cadence of it. A person accustomed to saying things that mattered, working carefully to keep her voice level. And what he saw, in the moment the reading lamp caught Adrienne Lowe's face at a particular angle, was the gray-blue band along the margin of her lower gum. He kept moving, his pace did not change. But his breathing went quiet, the way it had gone quiet in the trauma bay when a patient's presentation didn't line up with the mechanism of injury called in by the paramedics. He had learned to recognize that internal silence for what it was, not uncertainty, but the precursor to pattern recognition working faster than language. He knew what a Burton's line was. He knew it because Caroline had had one. A thin, bluish-gray deposit along the gingival margin caused by the precipitation of lead sulfide, where lead compound in the blood met the bacterial environment of gum tissue. He had seen it on his wife's lower teeth in the last 2 months of her illness and had not known what it was. He had pointed it out to her dentist, who attributed it to a reaction to a supplement she was taking. No one ordered a blood lead level until after she was gone, and by then the source had been confirmed as the corroded pipes in their building's water supply, useful only as an explanation, not as a remedy. He had read everything published about lead toxicity in the 12 months after Caroline died. He had read it the way a person studies a language they are desperate to acquire, completely, repeatedly, in the specific hope that fluency might retroactively prevent the thing that fluency had come too late to prevent. He knew what that line meant. In the next 30 seconds, as he continued down the corridor, he also cataloged what else he had registered. The hesitation in Adrienne Lowe's right wrist when she reached for the water glass on her bedside table. A slight but distinct failure to fully extend. Not the tremor of fatigue or the careful movement of someone in pain, but the specific incongruence of a wrist whose extensor muscles were not fully responding to instruction. Wrist drop, early stage, subclinical, the kind that preceded a diagnosable presentation by weeks. And the color of the skin on her inner forearms, visible where the blanket had fallen back. A slight pallor with a waxy undertone that was not the pallor of anemia or malnutrition, but of a system managing a sustained toxic load. He finished the pass. He walked to the service stairwell and sat on the second step from the bottom and looked at his hands. His wife had been admitted 3 times in her final 6 months. Each time, the presenting symptoms, fatigue, peripheral weakness, abdominal cramping, the cognitive fogging she described as trying to think through gauze, had been attributed to the autoimmune condition diagnosed in year 1, which had become the organizing framework for every clinical decision since. A lead level had never been checked because the diagnosis had been established. The symptoms fit that diagnosis, and no one had looked past it to ask what else might be true. He had not asked. He had been the person at the bedside, the husband, the man who trusted the people with degrees on the wall, because that was what you were supposed to do. And he had watched her deteriorate by degrees and trusted until there was nothing left to trust. And then there was nothing left at all. He was not going to do that again. He called Dr. Ruth Kimball at 6:20 in the morning, sitting in his car in the Harwick parking structure, still in his uniform, engine running, heat low. Ruth Kimball had been the attending on Caroline's third admission. She had also been the person who filed the formal query with the hospital's toxicology service when the post-mortem results came back, too late, generating no clinical outcome, but filed and documented and signed. She had never said to Leonard directly that she regretted not asking the right question earlier. She had said, once, at the memorial service, standing apart from the other mourners, that she thought about his wife more than was professionally standard. He had understood what that meant. She answered on the third ring. Leonard described what he had seen, the gingival line, its color and position, the width of the band, the sharpness of its demarcation, the wrist presentation, the specific quality of the extensor weakness he had observed, the skin tone. He gave her the information the way he had been trained to present a patient. Sequentially, without editorializing, letting the clinical picture assemble itself in the listener's mind. Ruth did not speak for a long time. "The wrist drop," she said finally. "If it's as early as you're describing, she's been accumulating for months. The gingival line requires sustained exposure above a threshold. This is not incidental. This is not environmental. She's been receiving intravenous protocol treatments here for 14 months. Another silence. Lead acetate is colorless, odorless, soluble. It would not visually alter a clear IV solution. A pause. "Leonard, who's running her treatment?" "Dr. Philip Stroud, neurology chief." "I know Stroud." Her voice said several things at once, none of them charitable. "Who else knows what you saw?" "No one. Don't say anything to anyone inside that building yet. I need you to get me something, a blood draw from her, outside their lab system. And if you can get access to the IV solution, a sample, a photo of the labeling, anything, I need that too." He thought about this. He had night access credentials to the 4th floor treatment suite corridor. He had a rotating schedule that put him there every 2 hours. He had 14 months of invisible familiarity with the building's rhythms and the habits of its overnight staff. What he did not have was a reason Adrienne Lowe would give a security guard 3 minutes of her time at 5 in the morning. He thought about that for the rest of the day. Through the 7 hours of fragmented sleep he caught between 8 and 3, and through Wren's account of what had happened at school, delivered over the bowl of soup she had heated herself because she knew he needed to wake up slowly. He thought about the fact that Adrienne Lowe ran a foundation, that she spent her professional life asking people to pay attention to things the rest of the world was content to ignore, that she had been in that bed for 14 months getting progressively worse, and had not simply accepted the explanation, because people who build things from nothing do not accept explanations without question. They simply, often, have no better explanation to offer. He thought she might listen, if he came to her with specifics rather than alarm. He went to the pharmacy supply storage on the 4th floor at 2:15 in the morning, 3 nights after the call with Ruth. The room was accessed by his standard security key and was typically unstaffed after midnight. He was looking for the preparation log, documentation of which IV solutions were mixed for which patients and when. Adrienne Lowe's treatment protocol was listed. 12 bags of a primary solution from a licensed pharmaceutical supplier, lot numbers traceable and correctly formatted, manufacturer registration current. Beside each entry, in a different hand, a notation for a secondary additive. Phase compound, P.S. personal stock. P.S. Philip Stroud. The secondary additive had no lot number, no manufacturer code, no pharmacy verification signature. It had been added to every one of Adrienne Lowe's 14 treatment sessions by a notation in the primary physician's own handwriting, and it existed in the preparation log only as a personal notation with no regulatory tracing. Leonard photographed every page of the relevant entries. He also photographed the rear of the IV refrigerator, where a single locked steel case sat on the bottom shelf behind the licensed pharmaceutical stock. The label read, P. Stad, Personal Clinical Materials. He left the storage room. He continued his pass. His face showed nothing. At 5:10 the following morning, he found Adrienne Lowe in the fourth-floor family consultation room, which she used before her treatment sessions on days when she arrived before the rest of the wing's administrative staff. She was alone, reading from a tablet, dressed in a blazer despite the hour, because she had decided years ago that she would not allow illness to make her look like an ill person in professional spaces. She looked up when Leonard Page appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Page," she said. She had learned the names of the night security staff in her first week because she believed in knowing the names of the people in a room. "I need to show you something," he said, "and I need you to tell me whether I'm right or wrong about what I'm looking at." She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she set the tablet down. "Come in." He did not sit. He stood near the window, laid his phone on the table, and walked her through the preparation log photographs. He pointed out the secondary additive notation, the absence of regulatory documentation, the locked personal case. He described the gingival line in clinical terms, the way it presented in cases of sustained lead compound exposure. He described the wrist presentation and what it indicated about peripheral nerve involvement. He was specific and sequential, and he did not use the word deliberately, though everything he was describing pointed directly at it. Adrienne Lowe looked at the photographs for a long time without speaking. Then she set the phone down, opened her mouth slightly, and turned toward the light coming through the consultation room window. She used the screen of her darkened tablet as a partial mirror and looked at her own lower gum line. The silence was very long. "My brother," she said, "before he died, he had a line like this. We were told it was a medication reaction." She paused. "We were told a lot of things." "I need a blood draw from you," Leonard said, "outside this building's lab system. I have a physician I trust. If the lead level is there, it can't be argued away. If I'm wrong, I'll never mention any of this again." She looked at him the way she looked at research proposals that arrived on her desk without institutional affiliation or established pedigree, with the specific attention of someone who had learned that the most important findings often came without the correct letterhead. "How did you know what you were looking at?" she asked. "My wife," he said. "I didn't know what I was looking at until it was too late to matter." Adrienne Lowe stood. She crossed to the cabinet beside the window. She had started keeping a clinical supply kit there in month 4, when she decided she did not want to be entirely dependent on the building's medical staff for basic monitoring, and removed a blood draw kit. She drew her own sample, 2 tubes, with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent years adjacent to clinical procedure and retained more than she had ever been credited for retaining. Leonard labeled the tubes according to Ruth's instructions. He was in the elevator by 5:30. The corridor behind him was empty. Ruth ran the blood lead level twice. The result was the same both times, 41 micrograms per deciliter. The occupational threshold for concern was 10. The clinical toxicity threshold in a neurological presentation was 30. Adrienne Lowe's level was not accidental. It was not environmental. It was not the product of a single contamination event, a dietary source, or corroded pipes. It was the product of repeated, deliberate, sustained administration of a lead compound, calibrated carefully enough to produce progressive neurological symptoms without triggering the acute crisis that would have required emergency intervention and outside consultation. Ruth also analyzed a small sample Leonard had obtained from the preparation room, not from the locked case, which required a key he did not have, but from residual volume remaining in a used bag from Adrienne's previous session left in the biohazard collection area before disposal. The spectrometry result was unambiguous. Lead acetate, in a concentration sufficient to produce precisely the clinical picture Adrienne Lowe had been presenting for 14 months. Leonard received Ruth's findings at 4 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table reading them while Wren slept. He thought about the logic of it. A foundation with $160 million in assets, administered by a CEO whose ongoing medical dependency kept her at Harwick and kept her reliant on Philip Stroud's expertise and judgment. A treatment protocol with no endpoint and no independent verification. A CEO who authorized expenditures without the scrutiny she would have applied to any other budget line. Because she trusted the man across the infusion chair more than she trusted any spreadsheet, because he was the one who could see inside her body and she could not. He thought about Gerald Fenn, the Foundation's CFO, who had countersigned every treatment authorization and who had, according to financial records. Adrienne quietly pulled the previous day after Leonard's first visit, transferred $4.8 million in consulting fees to a neurological research holding company over 13 months. A holding company that shared a registered agent address with Philip Stroud's private practice, LLC. He thought about his wife, about the water in their pipes, and the way the system had processed Caroline's death as a tragedy of infrastructure rather than a failure of attention, his attention, the hospital's attention, the attention of everyone who looked and saw the diagnosis they already knew, rather than the fact they had not yet understood. He had spent 3 years being careful with that grief, not extinguishing it, not performing it, just carrying it in the quiet way that Wren had learned, without knowing she was learning it, from watching him move through mornings. He was not angry. He was something older and more deliberate than anger. He forwarded Ruth's full toxicology report to Adrienne Lowe at 4:20 in the morning with a single line, "This is what I found. What you do with it is yours to decide." Her response came 40 minutes later, "Come in at 7. Bring everything." The conference room on the 10th floor held the full board of the Lowe Foundation, 4 members of the Foundation's external legal team, the head of Harwick's independent compliance office, and 2 forensic investigators retained the previous afternoon under a non-disclosure agreement Adrienne Lowe had drafted herself. Leonard Page stood near the wall to the left of the windows in his night security uniform, because that was the uniform he was wearing, and he had not thought to bring anything else. And because Adrienne Lowe had told him to stand where he would be visible, and he had no reason to argue with her. Gerald Fenn arrived at 7:02 and stopped when he saw the investigators. His face moved through 3 expressions in under a second and settled on the one that would be most useful. Dr. Philip Stroud arrived at 7:05. He looked around the room with the composed attention of a man performing composure for an audience he had not yet identified. Then he saw Leonard Page standing against the wall. His expression did not change. He was very good at not changing his expression, but he looked at the security guard for 1 second longer than the situation required. Adrienne Lowe presented the evidence from the head of the table, the blood lead level. Ruth Kimball's analysis of the residual IV solution, the preparation log entries for the unverified secondary additive, the financial transfer records, and the corporate registry connecting Stroud's consulting company to the receiving entity, and the surveillance footage pulled by the compliance director from the 4th floor preparation room archive, covering the eve of 14 treatment sessions, showing Philip Stroud, alone, opening his personal locked case, drawing from an unlabeled vial, adding a measured volume to Adrienne Lowe's prepared IV bag, and replacing the vial with the specific care of someone who had done this enough times that it no longer required conscious attention. 14 instances, 14 nights. Philip Stroud denied it. He had 17 seconds of denial before the footage reached the 3rd instance and the gesture of his hand. The slight angle at which he held the vial when drawing from it was recognizable enough that his own attorney leaned over and said something quiet into his ear. After that, he did not speak again. Gerald Fenn's attorney arrived on the 11th floor before 9. The regulatory referrals were filed before noon. The criminal complaint followed the next morning, filed by the Foundation's external counsel in coordination with the State Attorney General's office, which had been briefed over the weekend. Philip Stroud's medical license was suspended pending investigation. Gerald Fenn's access to the Foundation's financial systems was revoked. Leonard Page was in the parking structure at 1:15 that afternoon, changed out of his uniform, bag over his shoulder, walking to his car, when Adrienne Lowe came up beside him. She was not moving like someone conserving reserves. She was moving like someone who had decided provisionally to trust that the ground would hold. "I need to tell you something before you leave," she said. He waited. "Well, now, I had a conversation with our compliance director this morning. There's a position that needs to exist in this organization. Independent clinical oversight, reporting directly to the board, not to the medical directorship. I've been told it would require someone with both clinical training and the specific temperament to sit in rooms with credentialed people and say the uncomfortable true thing." She paused. "I'm not offering you a reward. I want to be clear about that. I'm offering you a job that the last 14 months have demonstrated we needed and didn't have." He looked at the parking structure wall for a moment. He thought about Wren's drawing on the kitchen counter. He thought about the figure it depicted. Someone in a dark uniform standing in front of a large window, doing something that from a 9-year-old's angle looked like fixing rather than watching. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking," she said. He drove to Wren's school in the afternoon light, with the heat on and the radio off. She was waiting on the front steps with her backpack and a folded sheet of construction paper she had apparently been carrying since lunch. "It's for your new job," she said, holding it out before he could speak. He unfolded it on the hood of the car. The same tall figure with the circle badge, but in this version, the figure was inside the building, standing in a room full of smaller figures, all of them looking in the same direction. At the bottom, in the same block letters, Dad showed them where to look. He stood on the sidewalk with the paper in his hands and the afternoon running its ordinary noise around them, and felt, for the first time in 3 years, that the weight he carried was not pulling him backward. It was just weight. The kind that becomes something else when you finally stop walking away from it. He took his daughter's hand, and they walked to the car together, and the drawing went into his shirt pocket, folded carefully over his heart, where it stayed for the rest of the day. The Foundation's clinical oversight position was formalized 6 weeks later. The title was Adrienne Lowe's idea. The first thing Leonard Page did in the role was build a checklist, a simple, systematic, 2-page protocol for identifying gaps between what a treatment record said and what a patient's body showed. He wrote it from memory. It required no credential he did not already have. It required only the willingness to look at what was in front of him and say plainly what he saw. $12 million had not found what he found in 40 seconds through a half-open door. He did not think that was remarkable. He thought it was the most ordinary thing in the world, because the truth was almost always in the room. The only question was whether anyone in the room had been trained by loss to see it.